Hi, I'm Dennis Wells. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the Financial Advantage. We are joined today by Matt Carroll, who is a mediator with Keystone Mediation in Dyer, and really excited to dive into how it is that you help people that are going through, probably one of the very, most challenging, aspects of life, and how it is that you provide help and and guidance that sometimes people maybe don't even think of when they're entering into a divorce situation. So maybe to get started, tell us a little bit about what mediation is and how you got started into mediation.
Well, thanks, Dennis. I really appreciate this opportunity to kind of talk a little bit about mediation today. As to a little bit about me, I started my private practice back in 2019. I think we opened the doors January 1st, 2020, and then we're shut down April of 2020 because of COVID. So that was exciting. Just getting off the start, and then a global pandemic hit. So that was a challenge as a small business owner. But yeah, I'm really fortunate because unfortunately, almost half of divorces or half of marriages end in divorce, and there's a lot of different ways that you can go through a divorce, and we offer an alternative way. What got me into this was I used to be a contract negotiator for a union. I used to be a professional musician. A little bit that's kind of surprising that people don't know about me because they only know me as Matt the Mediator, is that in my past life, I am actually a Grammy and Emmy award-winning musician. So that
Wow.
was, I know, it's crazy. I still have a hard time. Halfway to an EGOT. I don't think I'll ever get the other two, but one never knows. There's still time, Dennis. But no, as part of being a member of the union, I got really interested in the contract negotiation portion and the collective bargaining process, to be specific. And the collective bargaining process is a terrible process for the most part, because most negotiators only know what they know. And that's a very traditional classic bargaining positional method. And I want to raise, and we want you to take a pay cut. And then before you know it, you kind of meet halfway and nobody wins and everybody's equally disgruntled. And I knew there had to be a different way. Well, we were introduced to the Federal Conciliation and Mediation Services, who would send a federal mediator anytime there was a labor dispute. And I was just so intrigued by that process. It was a different way of seeing things, seeing through a different lens, different approach. And I fell in love with it immediately. I took the federal mediator out for a coffee and asked him some advice, like, how do I do what you do? And he's the one that led me in this direction, which prompted me to go back to school to Northwestern University, where I completed courses in negotiation skills and divorce mediation and civil mediation. And then from there, I got introduced to the Center for Conflict Resolution in the Loop in downtown Chicago on Madison. And I became a mediator, volunteer mediator for them. And then shortly after that, I was accepted into their mediator mentorship program, which is a highly selective mentorship program where you're partnered with a master mediator that's been doing it for years. And in turn, you have to commit to 3 years of service to provide Cook County and the city of Chicago with free mediation services. So I volunteer still to this day. I've gone beyond my 3 years. I'm actually at 5 years now, and I've served on multiple committees, but I love it. I just love bringing people together, getting people to see a different perspective, kind of like what I experienced being on that end. And that's a
Mhm.
unique perspective because I can actually say, I sat at that negotiation table. I have some familiarity of it's like being on that side of the table, knowing the frustrations that lead up to a lawsuit or a strike or whatever it is, a divorce, right? It's just unresolved conflict that builds up until we finally reach a breaking point. So I do a lot of civil mediations in Cook County. I do landlord tenant cases. I do attorney fee cases when somebody's not happy with their attorney and choose not to pay their attorney. I can mediate those cases. I mediate stalking no contact cases. I mediate juvenile cases for kids that have been suspended or expelled from school to try to get them back into school and negotiate what that might look like. I've mediated neighbor disputes where a tree has fallen down and destroyed a fence, and they're arguing whose insurance is going to pay for it, or loud music, or I had a woman one time that was poisoning the neighbor's dog with rat poison, and because there was a territorial dispute over 5 feet of land of whose land it actually was. So you name it, I've done it. And then on the other side, I've done divorce mediation, and I've done a lot of couples mediation, which is not couples therapy. But just because I do a lot of divorce doesn't mean I'm pro divorce. So if I can help people stay together, I mean, ideally that's what's going to be, if it's in the best interest of their family, then I would like to help them craft a plan moving forward to address the parts of the marriage that aren't working. And that we've been seeing a lot of success there too. So it's a lot. I mean, people ask what my job's like. I say, well, it's a lot of people complaining and arguing and yelling at each other. But and some conversations are very serious and very difficult, and other conversations are very lighthearted. And so we find that balance through these conversations and through this process. And I just love it. It's intoxicating. There's an I've always kind of craved variety. I've never, routine is not me. That's not who I am. I like to be engaged and learn new things all the time. And because of the different walks of life of the different people that I've assisted in this process, I get that variety every day, because no couple is the same. No, everybody's slightly different. And so I really enjoy it.
No, that's great. And so I'm sure there's a lot of people that they just think, I'm getting a divorce, I've got to go to a lawyer. So part of our conversation is along the lines of helping people understand that there's a different way. And so I guess a good question would be, what are the benefits of working with a mediator as opposed to per se, we're just going to go get our lawyers and get this taken care of?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It doesn't necessarily have to be in opposition. The conversation is actually more about what is the difference between litigation versus mediation, because I
Right.
work with clients all the time that have legal representation as well.
Okay.
So it might not necessarily be, it can absolutely be an alternative to legal representation. And I would say 75 to 80% of my clients are unrepresented. However, there is a different process between litigation and mediation, and maybe I could start briefly there.
Yeah.
Litigation is the way that everybody traditionally knows. I hire
Right.
a lawyer, my ex hires a lawyer, or my soon-to-be ex hires a lawyer. I pay a retainer, she pays a retainer. I meet with them. I start my strategy, my litigation strategy. They start their litigation strategy. Then the rules of the state kick in. So then there's the way that you have to file, and then you have to follow discovery. And sometimes the judge will have a provisional hearing, kind of put an order temporarily in place to kind of address the status quo of what you're currently doing. Sometimes there's financial protective orders, sometimes there's physical protective orders when there's allegations of any kind of spousal or child abuse, or even if just the temperature's so hot that this couple just needs separated. So that's the litigation method. There's a lot of rules, a lot of processes, a lot of things that you got to go through. And and then the courts are involved, right? And so then ultimately, if you're not able to come to some sort of settlement, you usually attempt some sort of settlement conference with your attorney and their attorney, and that's there's different strategies with that, with a little bit of arm twisting and pressuring, and let's get this deal done, because ideally they just want to get the deal done. But if at the end of the day they don't get that deal done, they go to court, and then ultimately they each form a legal argument as to why they should get what they want, and then ultimately a third party judge decides. So that's the traditional litigation method. It tends to be costlier because you're each paying your own attorney, and if it does go to trial, it can be very costly. And depending on the length of the trial, and depending on even post-decree matters, and if there's alcohol or drug concerns, it can, or a GAL, which is a guardian ad litem, often gets appointed on behalf of the children that the parties have to pay. Now you're paying 3 professionals. It can become quite costly. And then you lose control of the process, because the control is now in the hands of the judicial system. And that's who makes those decisions. And that's where the control goes. The alternative, and that's why we call mediation as alternative dispute resolution, an alternative to that litigation process is the mediation process. The difference is whether they're represented by an attorney or not, they meet with a third party neutral, which is me. I don't represent either party. I can't give legal advice or financial advice. I can give legal information or financial information. I can tell them what to expect. I can tell them what the law is, what the statute is. I just can't interpret the law or the statute. That's going to be more of the role of an attorney would do. I can't interpret that, but I can provide them with, whatever information they need to make an informed decision. And that's my job. My job is to make sure the parties are making informed decisions. If I don't know the information, if they don't know the information, I just ask a lot of questions. Who can you talk to get this information? Do you think you can meet with them before our next appointment so that you're able to make an informed decision? The difference between mediation and a settlement conference is there is no arm twisting. There's no pressure to get the deal done. We have nothing but time. Go get the information that you need to make those informed decisions. If you need legal advice, then go get that consultation with an attorney. Have somebody in place, if not in play. Usually attorneys offer free consultations where they can give legal advice at that consultation, and it is protected by attorney-client privilege, even if you don't sign the contract, which a lot of people don't know that. So go consult with an attorney if you need legal advice, because I can't give that advice. Usually people, you mentioned early on that divorce is maybe one of the biggest things that you go through in life that is so difficult. And you're 100% correct. The loss of a parent or child or loved one is up there. Divorce is up there. It's too much for the human brain to take. It's just too much, because you're, oftentimes you're moving or relocating. You're used to seeing your children every single day of the year, and now you're not going to. You are concerned about your finances and your budget, and you're not sure what you can afford real estate wise, or where you're even going to live. You don't know how you're ever going to retire. I mean, and you throw all that on one plate, and it's just like, wow, where do we even start? And that's the nice thing about this process, is we go little bits at a time, little chunks. I like to tell my clients, it's like if I dumped a 2,000 piece puzzle on the table, looking at all those pieces, half are right side up, half are upside down, it can be overwhelming. It's like, where do I even start? But before you know it, you build the frame, flip all the pieces over, and you start sorting it out. You do little bits at a time. Before you know it, that puzzle is done. And that's kind of like this process. It's less overwhelming that way, because if I told people, I guess the difference with that analogy would be a settlement conference would be me telling the parties, like, you're not allowed to leave this table until you do this puzzle today. The difference between that versus mediation is, hey, just get a couple pieces together today, and that's good enough. And then tomorrow we'll get a couple more pieces, and before you know it, that puzzle's done. And it's an easier pill to swallow if the transition's a little slower. We walk them through it. The state of Indiana is a unique state because it allows mediators to complete a lot of the legal documents and file it with the court. I think there's only currently 3 states that allow for that, maybe 4. California just passed a new rule. You have to take a separate class, but you can get approved to do it as well. But there's not that many states that allow for mediators to do that. So what that means is here in Indiana, Indiana is another unique state that allows you to waive your final hearing. So if you resolve everything in mediation and you don't want to go to court, then usually you don't have to. Sometimes a judicial officer will have a question about the settlement agreement or might be concerned that it's not following Indiana law. But that's pretty rare because we're talking about those laws. We're talking about the statutes. If they want to deviate from one of those laws, then I ask a lot of questions like, what happens if the judge does kick this back? What if this is not acceptable? What would that look like then, to try to get them to think outside the box, but within the confines of the box, if that makes sense?
Yep.
You know, but also there's nothing wrong with throwing something against the wall and see if it sticks. You know, give it a shot, because ultimately at the end of the day, we talked about how litigation, you don't have control of the process. In mediation, you have 100% control of the process. It is your kids. It is your house. It is your retirement. And that's you with a capital Y, because there's 2 parties involved in a marriage. So mediation allows you to be in charge to say what you want to do with your stuff. It's one of the pillars of mediation is self-determination. It's just a bit of a dance because we have to find, you know, where that self-determination ends and where the rules and the laws kick in of the state begins. And sometimes it can be a little flexible. And that's where we're looking for that flexibility. So it can be a fantastic process. Most of my clients are surprised that it's a lot easier than they expected, because divorce is already hard emotionally.
Right.
You know, when you're going through litigation, you're stressed out. You have so much anxiety. You don't know what kind of strategy they're talking about on their end, and you don't really know how to prepare for that. That's where that's where your lawyer is going to help you with that preparation and get you ready for court. But at the end of the day, like I said, that judge makes that decision in litigation. In mediation, you make those decisions. You tell me what to submit to court. I'll reality test it. If it's not, you know, if it's like, hey, I'm going to keep 100% of the assets. Well, I'm going to say, you know, this is the rule. This is the law. Why do you think a court would accept this? You know, out of curiosity. And so that's the difference. The difference is that it is an alternative dispute resolution because it's an alternative to litigation, but it keeps people in charge of their family, their stuff, and in control of the process. That's the biggest difference, I would say.
Okay. And it sounds like, you know, if you put together a plan and you send it to the court, and maybe you're in kind of that gray area where maybe the judge will, maybe the judge won't. If he comes back and says no on one part, at least now in your analogy, most of the puzzle is together. You just have to figure out how to work the rest of this and you know, get it all put together and in a way that, you know, because obviously, you know, judges have, you know, things that they need to consider when they're making these rulings as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. But you bring up a good point, is that let's say there is a part or a provision that the judge won't accept, then they get to come back and talk about it. You know, what do you want to do now? The judge said no. So now what do you want to try? And that's where I also love mediation, is that there's a lot of flexibility built in. Many of my clients, they'll build in a provision where they agree to come back every year or every other year to do a check-in, just to say, hey, let's check in and say what's working well, what's not working well. The kids are getting older, you know, we're reaching driving age. Who's going to pay for the car insurance? Who's going to pay for the car? What about those cell phones? We're getting close to college. We need to talk about that. So sometimes that flexibility is built in so that it's just more of a conversation, because once you're no longer married, communication's different, transparency's different. You know, you're still a family, because nothing changes the fact that one person's dad and one person's mom, or one person's a parent and the other person's a parent. That doesn't change. But what does change is the dynamics of the family kind of changes, like where you're living access and communication, and then if you get step parents added to the mix, that adds some layers. And so having those normal check-ins is a nice, option for couples. And the other thing is that I think the biggest misconception about mediation is that, well, mediation's only for people for uncontested divorces that get along. That's not the case. I've had plenty of contested divorces, plenty of people that fought, plenty of people that didn't get along. But ultimately, at the end of the day, they knew this was the better alternative than fighting it out in court, because then you only have resentment towards the other parent. And
Mm-hmm.
then what does that do for the kids? And that's one thing I'd like to add too, is that the kids don't have a seat at the table. So if I ever push back on a parent, it's because I'll say, I understand where you're coming from. It makes sense what you're telling me. However, what about the kids? What would they
Mm-hmm.
say to this? And sometimes I'll even ask clients to put pictures of their kids on the table. And I'll say, you mean these kids right here? Just to remind them why we're here. We're here for them. We're here because they don't get a seat at the table. So what are we doing with them? What's in their best interests? You guys know your kids. I don't, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you tell me, what are your kids like? So it's a great way to customize. The good thing and the bad thing about law is that law kind of plunks, mom and dad and kids. The kids are one chunk and mom's another chunk and dad's another chunk. But what if those kids are 12 and 2? They have completely different needs. A 12-year-old and a 2-year-old has totally different needs. So the nice thing about mediation is I'll say, okay, what does the 12-year-old need? And maybe they craft a different parenting plan for each child, because they are so different. Mediation allows for that. It allows for that customization. It's fully customizable. And that's what I like to tell my clients, is your agreement is going to be like a fingerprint. It's going to be unique to you, because only you are the parents of these two children, So that's
Yep.
why it's going to be unique to you. Only you guys have saved X amount of money and have worked for these people and own this house. And so it might look different than your friend that you talked to who went through a divorce,
Mm-hmm.
because you're crafting it. You're
Right.
making this yours. And that's unique to mediation. You don't get that on the litigation side. So it does allow for that customization, that flexibility, the durability. And that's the other thing too about mediation, is that mediated agreements are 80% less likely to ever be litigated in the future. And it's the exact opposite for litigated agreements. In fact, we just met with a couple judicial officers, and they said if we have to make decisions, we know they will be back. It's almost like a guarantee that they're going to be repeat customers. Because if somebody won or feels like they won, then that means somebody else feels like they lost.
Mm-hmm.
And that person that feels like they lost is going to feel unheard, unvalidated, slighted, and all that's going to do is add to the tension of the family, add to that conflict. And the minute the person who was perceived as winning drops the kids off 15 minutes late, here comes the first contempt of court charge, rule to show cause. Who's that helping? How is that helping families? And even the model of the process of divorce, of litigation, is in the caption. It sounds harsh and people don't realize this, but when somebody files for a divorce, you are suing your co-parent. Like, how insane is that? That we have to
Right.
sue one another to get divorced. And then in the caption, it's mom versus dad.
Mm-hmm.
Or dad versus mom. How is that helpful to families? And
Right.
that's where we're offering something else,
Mm-hmm.
something different, something outside the box. And again, I don't think people realize that this isn't just for people who get along, but this is providing them a different option. They always have the right for legal representation, and
Mm-hmm.
they always have the right to go back to court. If mediation is voluntary, 100%, even if it's court ordered, you're only ordered to attend, but you are not ordered to participate.
Okay.
So it's completely voluntary. So if it's not working for you, you can always go back to court and litigate, and that's totally fine. In fact,
Mhm.
this is a cheaper alternative to give it a shot first.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking about our conversation before about the number of litigated cases that end up going back to court as opposed to the mediated cases, and totally agree that when you have had the opportunity to breathe and put together the plan, then with hopefully some end goal in mind, of some perceived ideal future for everybody, the less likely it is that we're going to go back and try to change this somehow.
Yeah.
Other than, like you're saying, maybe review it on a yearly basis, almost like your home insurance or something, to make sure, do you still have the adequate coverage? Have you have you bought
Exactly.
any, have you made any changes? Have you had kids, or whatever, to make sure that your insurance policy works. Same thing with, hey, let's make sure that our agreement that we set up is still serving all of our best interests.
Yeah, and child support too. Are the children financially being supported? I don't know any parents that come in and say, I don't want to financially support my children.
Mm,
I've yet to meet a parent that says that. That's never an issue.
right.
The issue with child support is that you have to pay your ex.
Hmm.
And that's the issue, because you lose control of how the money's going to be spent, where it's going to go. But like, I think it's this popular misconception that child support pays for, girls' trips to Napa Valley or guys' trips to Vegas. Like that's it's paying for heat that your kids use when they're at your house. It pays
Hmm.
for electricity, because let's be honest, kids don't shut lights out. They just
Right.
don't. They
Right.
leave lights on everywhere, and then you have to walk through the house and shut it all off. When they're at your house, you're burning through a ton more electricity when they're not at your house.
Yep.
When they're at your house, kids eat a lot of food, and the last time I checked, food costs a lot of money.
Yep.
So trust me when I say child support probably is never truly enough,
Right.
because like I said, it's the way it's designed is that if the kids are used to living in a Lululemon house, then it needs to be a Lululemon house at dad's and a Lululemon house at mom's. It can't be Lululemon in Walmart, right? They're used to
Hmm.
living in a certain lifestyle, so we have to preserve that lifestyle. We have to preserve that it's equal at both homes.
Right.
It really isn't even that big of a change. Like, I think that's the other popular misconception when it comes to child support. The first one being is like, I lose control over where it's spent. But the second popular misconception is that all of a sudden I'm paying all of this money. No, you're not. You're paying exactly what you did before. It's
Hmm.
just
Right.
divided differently. That's all.
Right. Right.
It's not really a change. It's just kind of preserving what you're currently spending and currently doing, and how they're living, and what kind of car you have, and if they're in soccer or basketball or what have you, choir plays. We're just preserving that and making sure that they can continue, because again, they don't get a seat at the table. So let's
Hmm.
make this as smooth of a transition as possible for these children, and that includes child support. However, it's all this is where, like, the difference between court and mediation also is that court doesn't really care about your emotions, right? It's like,
Hmm.
what are you doing with your stuff? Are these kids going to be supported? What do you do with your retirement? But in mediation, I can acknowledge and say, I hear you. I hear you're frustrated. I get why you would
Hmm.
be pissed. It makes total sense. And that's a nice thing too about mediation, because it helps build empathy
Right.
between parties who are in conflict. You don't get that empathy in the courtroom.
Yep. No. No. Absolutely. Absolutely. And obviously, divorce touches. You talked on. You mentioned retirement accounts. You mentioned children. Real estate, finances. And I imagine all of those different areas. You have to create maybe an overarching plan, but then sub plans for those different areas. Is that something that part of what you're doing as well?
Absolutely. And again, that's where you get a little bit more of that customizable. Where does it look 6 months from now? What does it look like a year from now? What does it look like 2 years from now?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we, as you know, I don't like when the parties are here, all of us are sitting at the table, we're going through finances, and I'll say, okay, I'm hearing this, and let's lock down this scenario. Now let's look at a
Mm-hmm.
completely different scenario. And they may get 3, 4, 5 different financial scenarios. And then I'll say, do you have a financial advisor or a tax person or somebody that you can walk these scenarios through with to help you make these informed decisions that we talked about? By
Mm-hmm.
no means am I a financial, I have an idea of what I'm doing, but I'm not a financial advisor. That is not my
Mm-hmm.
role. And in fact, that's why I can't give advice, because in Indiana, you cannot serve as dual roles, meaning I can't be the financial advisor and the mediator. I can't be the lawyer and the mediator. I can't be the lawyer and the financial advisor. You can't serve in dual roles. So take these scenarios, take them to a financial person, talk about your options. Maybe, one of these scenarios isn't your best fit. Maybe they're going to recommend an even different scenario, and that's okay. So, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
we can create those sub plans. And when do you think you can accomplish this by, so that everybody has a clear picture as to when we're returning to the table to make those informed decisions? And sometimes they come back with two completely different plans. I want scenario three. I want scenario one. Okay, let's talk about the pros and cons of each. But by the time you have that conversation, you usually can find some sort of middle ground that both parties can equally accept. That doesn't mean, like, in a lot of our mediation training, I feel it's a little misleading, because in a lot of materials you see you're helping the clients get to a win-win. Well, in divorce, does anybody truly win? I think it's more, let's get the parties to an acceptable. What can I
Mm-hmm.
accept and what can you accept? I don't want anybody to feel like they're winning, right? Because
Right.
nobody truly wins. It really comes down to, I even say, like, if there's parts of your agreement that both of you don't like, then it's probably fair. That's usually a sign that compromise occurred. And
Mm-hmm.
compromise is such a bad word in today's society, but it used to be a good word. And in my
Right.
profession, it still is a good word. That's kind of what our goal is.
Yep. No, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, you do have someone, I think, that works alongside you, that is a certified divorce financial planner, I believe, and you know he helps with some of that if they want that.
She,
Or
yes, it's
she?
a
Oh,
separate contract. My partner, Mariah, she's a certified divorce financial analyst. She's also a certified financial planner. She used to work at Chase in their wealth and asset division, and
okay.
she would see firsthand how divorce would destroy their wealth and assets. And so that was her trajectory. And she comes from the financial side. It's a completely different contract. I don't communicate with her because I'm a neutral, but it's also confidential.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't want my neutrality to be influenced in any way. Plus, she's in a position where she can give advice as a financial analyst and as an advisor. So they meet with her separate. She advises them each separately, and helps them identify their short-term needs, their long-term needs, because we only get one chance to make this right. So
Mm-hmm.
let's make it right where we're addressing each of your needs to find, again, that sweet spot that is mutually acceptable. But yes, that is another service that we do provide, is that certified divorce financial analyst, where she is trained as a neutral and trained specifically in divorce. And then people like yourself, if there's somebody that is going to be selling their home and they don't know a realtor, or they're concerned that the realtor they used last time is going to take one side or the other, or the last time we used a realtor, it was your cousin, and I
Right.
don't feel comfortable using your cousin again. That's where my referral network, I can say, are you familiar with a certified divorce real estate expert? That's somebody that's trained specifically in divorce for this exact scenario. Can I give you a few names? Or
Mm-hmm.
a certified divorce financial analyst, or a certified divorce lending professional that a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people don't know about, like yourself as well. So I can send people to those people where they're getting a neutral approach that's going to help them almost in a collaborative way. Now, I can't speak with those professionals unless my clients sign a waiver and say it's okay for you to speak, because sometimes it's easier for the professionals to talk to avoid the middleman and play the game of telephone. But
Hmm.
because this is a confidential process, I can't unless they waive confidentiality that it does allow me. But by no means does anyone make decisions on behalf of the parties. Ultimately, at the end of the day, they have to make those decisions. And that's where some people feel better having that attorney present, the attorney,
Hmm.
and then help them and say, look, at all this great work you did, and here's the 5 professionals that are recommended. Let me review it and see if this is in your best legal interest and
Hmm.
see if it does
Yep.
align with the state's laws. And that might be where that attorney kind of fits into that collaborative approach. At the end of the day, you do have one shot to get this right. And
Hmm.
ultimately, you get to make those decisions what path you want to go. Our biggest, I would say, our biggest stumbling block or our biggest obstacle is that people just don't know about mediation. It's still
Hmm.
not in the
Right.
mainstream vernacular. Nobody, when you tell your friend you're getting a divorce, they say, let me give you my attorney's phone number who did my divorce. Nobody says, let me give you a phone number of a good mediator. Like, it's just not
Right.
out there. So
Right.
that's our biggest struggle.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, and that's part of why we wanted to get on the podcast, is to let people know that there is another way, because it's not their fault, right? I mean, because none of us know what we don't know, and
Right.
so getting the message out there that there is a different way, to consider, and obviously nothing against the legal profession, but at the same time helping people see that there is an alternative. I mean, there's still a legal process, obviously, that goes on, but there is an alternative that, you know, for many people, obviously, can produce a happier and a more long-term result than the traditional way that people mostly know about.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love the fact that you say that you can't fault people for not knowing what they don't know.
Right.
And if there is a knock, I guess, on the litigation process, is that most attorneys will tell you that they are not real estate experts. They are not
Hmm.
retirement experts. They are not financial experts. They are not tax experts. They do a lot of this stuff, but that doesn't make them experts in the field. And they'll tell you that, right? It's almost unfair to put all that pressure on your legal
Hmm.
representative to be that expert, right? Because
Right.
then I think we trust the attorneys that we hire almost to be these experts. They're not a child psychiatrist. They're
Right.
not
Right.
child psychologists, right? They they do the best they can. And
Hmm.
their job is to represent you and zealously advocate for you. That is their
Right.
job. But it's almost unfair that we expect them to be experts of all these different fields. And that's
Right.
where I think mediation is different as an alternative, because I also am not an expert, but I'm going to put you in contact with experts
Right. Right.
and go get the information that you need to make these educated decisions.
Yep.
And I'm not going to make them sit at a table and say this puzzle has to be done by the end of the day.
Right.
That's not an educated decision. That just gets the job done for today. It's
Right.
it's the diff, I like to use a lot of analogies. It's like having a wound. You can put a band-aid on it and it might stop the bleeding today, but is it healing the wound?
Right.
Probably not. Probably
Right.
not. But if we get you to go see a specialist, a wound specialist, and they give you 3 different options on how to treat that wound, there's a good chance it's going to heal.
Yep.
And so that's kind of the difference between the two.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I was thinking as you were talking about, that it is unfair to put some of these expectations on legal representatives, because like every one of the groups that you mentioned, so whether it's lenders, mediators, financial planners, real estate agents, they all have to do continuing education every year. There's usually substantial amount of education required to get into the field, and if whether they're in the legal profession or not, for some person to be able to do all of those things, they would probably spend most of their time in continuing education and not actually be able to help anybody, because they're just trying to keep up with, like you're saying, the specialized nature of these things, because it is a little more complicated
Oh,
than
for sure. You're
you know.
you're 100% correct, and there are requirements for attorneys to get continuing education credits, and mediators too. I have to
Hmm.
get, but the difference is like with me being a divorce mediator, my mediation credits that I get are kind of related to this. An
Yep.
attorney can take whatever they want for continuing ed, so they may choose to do retirement, continuing ed,
Right.
but they can also do some sort of continuing ed on contracts or on estate planning or on personal injury lawsuits or on constitutional law. It's a neat thing about being an attorney is once you pass the bar, you get to practice whatever kind of law you want,
Right.
and you can be everything if you want to be as an attorney, and
Yep.
a lot of attorneys are, as they offer all these different types of services, but then you spread your portfolio really thin.
Right.
And that's
Right.
where, again, you know I'm going to ask that attorney, if this goes to trial, would you call yourself to the stand as your expert witness? Probably not. You're probably going to
Right.
bring in the pediatrician or the real estate expert or
Yep.
the financial expert or the person who's going to get into the forensics. You're not going to get the person that offers the big menu. That's probably most likely not going to be your expert witness. So
Mm.
that's where, like, even an attorney will most likely tell you, like, I know when I need to get that expert opinion. And so, but oftentimes, like, I guarantee you don't get too many calls from attorneys.
No.
Yeah, exactly. And again, it's just that unrealistic expectation that litigants have of their attorneys to be that expert in every field, because it's their
Yep.
job to give me advice. So, and I'm paying a lot of money for that advice. So it better be expert advice. And that's not fair. It's also not fair that we put that much pressure on our judicial officers, because
Hmm.
they too are not experts in most fields. They're
Right.
making the best decisions they can for what's presented in front of them in court.
Yep.
And it's almost unfair that we ask them to make these decisions for people, to say which parent the kid should be with, and all these just amazing decisions that they have to make. I
Yep.
don't envy that role. That's a terrible role to be in, to
Yep.
have to make these decisions on behalf of people because they can't get along.
Yep.
And that's where, again, I know I keep touting mediation, but that's, again, where we're going to let you make those decisions.
Yep.
It's
Yep.
your kids, it's your life, it's your money. You make those decisions. Like, it's going to be
Hmm.
hard, and it's going to require a lot of conversation and educated decisions, but ultimately you get to make them.
Right. Right.
And the
Um,
attorney is there if they need to be, to
yeah.
advise you.
No, I love it, and definitely having had some conversations with you has opened up my eyes a lot to what it is that you do, and in all walks of life, because unfortunately, 50% or so of marriages end up in divorce. There's
Mm-hmm.
always, you end up with people asking, who do you know?
Mm-hmm.
And, so a great opportunity to say, have you considered mediation? And, have you considered, you know, being able to work on a plan together, with a mediator to, get you where you want to be and help you get a more desired outcome at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah. I love the way you phrase that, to get a more desired outcome at the end of the day. I think that's
Mhm.
great. Yeah. Because
Cool.
ultimately that is what we want them to have.
Yep.
is a customized experience that gets them the outcome they want at the end of the day.
Yep.
And that's to make sure your kids are healthy, taken care of, that things are split relatively fairly, and that both you're going to feel safe and secure both physically and financially, and that the kids are going to stay healthy, and that they're going to
Yep.
respect each other at the end of the day. And that's really what it comes down to. What kind of co-parenting relationship do we want to model for our children moving forward? And that's important.
Yeah. No, I love it. Well, Matt, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. If someone wanted to get a hold of you or pass along your information, what's the best way for them to reach out?
Great question. KeystoneMediation.com. My contact information is there. They can also call me at 219-440-1882. Those are the best ways. You can even book appointments online. It syncs with my calendar. It's kind of like Christmas. Every day I'll open my email and I'll see I've got 2 or 3 new appointments where people just booked online, but it's convenient. And and that's last thing that I'll say is that that's the other nice thing is I work weekends, evenings. People work really hard, so don't have to miss work to take care of this. Like, we're going to work with you with a flexible schedule, so they can get a hold of me on the website or on the phone, and we can work with them at their schedule and their time to help them through this, because it's not a fun process. Like I said, it's hard, but we don't need to make it difficult.
Yep. Yep. I love it. Well, thank you again for being a part of the podcast, this Financial Advantage powered by the Wells Funding Group. You can reach us at our direct number, 219-230-8400. Matt, thanks again. And we'll definitely do this again.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Dennis. And thanks for everything you do for raising awareness and for also helping people going through divorce on the lending side. That's extremely important. And again, you're educating people and helping those people make those educated decisions. So thank you for your dedication to not only spread the word, but to help people, it like you said, at one of the most difficult times in their life. So thank you as well.
All right. Thank you. Well, have a great day.
Take care, Dennis. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.